Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
And I'm Damian Sassower.
Scarlet will be back later on. Coming up, we check in on the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. Plus, we head to Chicago. The Bears have their new QB, and now they're hoping to have a brand new stadium. All that and more is straight ahead on the Bloomberg Business of Sports, but we start with the NFL and the draft.
With the first pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears select Caleb Williams, quarterback, Southern California.
That's USC quarterback Caleb Williams going number 1 overall, jump-starting this year's draft. To take us through everything that happened draft night and where things stand for the league, we welcome NFL Network analyst and former NFL head coach Brian Billick. Brian, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you for having me. Always an exciting time. We're talking about adding talent into the NFL.
Yeah. Well, my first thought, what do you think about the draft?
Well, first you got to look. What a spectacular event! I mean, over 700,000 people in Detroit. I don't know that will ever be broken. It's amazing to me that the ratings on, particularly that first night, they upwards of 13 million people. That's more than the NBA or NHL playoff games. I know I sound like Allen Iverson, but we're talking about games, right? Compared to a show that's nothing more than really making a list. So, the energy and the interest in it's unbelievable.
Brian, I mean, you are right in Michael Barr's warehouse talking about Detroit, the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. I mean, oh my God, I have a tear in my eye thinking about it. But, let's go through the draft. I mean, some winners, some losers. I mean, I'm looking at the Eagles and Chiefs, and they look stronger to me on paper. And then you've got some of the other teams out there, the Falcons, the Raiders, the Vikings, all of whom are taking quarterback. But, I look back at what they've done, and I'm like, what is going on here? Brian, help us out.
Well, anytime you bring that many quarterbacks, and this was a record number of quarterbacks taken in the first 12 picks, the thing that I always look at, and beyond whether it's the right pick or not and whether they're going to be good or not, I mean, tradition tells us that 50% of these guys are going to fail. And that's just the way it is in the NFL, which is amazing. You think of the analytics and the experience we have, but it's such a unique position. And when you're taking 6 guys in the first 12 picks, it increases the numbers. And what it does is it pushed a lot of really good football players down to the draft, down further in the draft, guys that you would nowhere in a million years. You're a Jet fan. They got that good tackle from Penn State. There's no way he's outside of a top 10 pick on a normal year, but because of the quarterbacks and the receivers that were taken, you had guys like that pushed down. Brock Bowers from Georgia gets pushed down to the Raiders. The big rush edge guy, Dallas Turner, gets pushed to the Vikings at number 17. I mean, there's no way in a normal draft that a talent like Dallas Turner is going to get pushed down to the 17th pick. So this was a really good, solid draft for a lot of teams, not the least of which is the fact is that quarterbacks and receivers push so many good players down the draft board.
Let's go back to 1977, and you were selected 11th in the 11th round by the San Francisco 49ers. My wife would love that, by the way. That's her team. And but my goodness, from 1977 until today, I can't. This is going to sound like a simpleton question, but how much has it changed the NFL draft?
It's interesting. Certainly, obviously, and there weren't even 11 rounds. Back then, I would be an undrafted free agent, right? Because it only goes through the top 7 rounds, and then you get into a whole nother layer of it. I think the biggest change, the game itself, The evaluation of talent, certainly like everything, it's become more mechanized. It's become more data driven. But at the end of the day, it still is that combination, that art science of experience, intuition, along with the data in choosing these players. The difference is the attention. We just talked about the draft. There are so many people focused into the draft, better than 60 million people over the 3 days. And they're all fantasy league driven guys. My 8-year-old grandson can sit here and tell you every team, every quarterback, receiver, running back, what he did. And so everybody is so focused on these players coming in because they're getting cranked up for the fantasy league. That interest and the level of interest is it's why the NFL just blows the doors off any other league.
So, Brian, fast forward. My son is 19 years old, and believe me, he was playing fantasy since he can crawl. And he is the one who brought it to my attention, right? Are you ready for this? Joe Burrow's record-setting deal with the Bengals pays him $55 million a year in Cincinnati to be their quarterback. And then you've got Caleb Williams, who's going to be the highest-paid rookie out of this year's class, obviously. Quarterback, USC. He's going to be making $8 million a season. So here's the deal. That differential, I mean, my son's explaining to me, he's like, Dad, the Texans have C.J. Stroud. You don't understand. They can shoot for the moon. And so explain to me and our audience a little bit about that concept of these teams like the Jets a few years back, breaking the bank for a quarterback only to release him a few years later for pennies on the dollar. I mean, talk to us a little bit about how this impacts general managers, Joe Douglas, Eric DeCosta in Baltimore, your old shop. Talk to us about what they're thinking inside the war room.
Well, it's a lot because when you're talking about taking a quarterback, and there were 6 taken in the first round, the difference being in the old day, these rookie contracts were huge, huge contracts. They've gotten that under control now. That's why there's a differentiation between guys that have been in the league that are waiting for that second contract and the rookies. That's what makes them so attractive, that you can be, particularly if you hit it, and if a Caleb Williams or a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May hit it with Chicago or Washington or New England or any of these quarterbacks, that's a huge plus because you're playing on their rookie money, which, like you said, $8 million a year it's not like we got to go start a GoFundMe page for these guys. They're doing okay. Right? But they're really waiting, obviously, for that next contract. Now you're talking about that 100 million, 150, 200 million guaranteed money, that next level of contract that we just saw Lamar Jackson get from last year. So the rookie cap, which is a good thing, because before the rookie cap came in, you were having to dole out huge amounts of monies to the rookies who hadn't played it down in the NFL. Now that money gets pushed to the veterans, those that have already played and shown in the league. The rookie contracts typically will go 4, maybe 5 years if they have an option year. Good, solid payday, but it's not the payday that's going to be if they get to that second contract. So that's why the differentiation, the number right now, and why the rookies that are so valued, because they get to play on that rookie number compared to what you got to play the veteran. I think the cap this year is going to be, I'm maybe off a little bit, but $270 million. You would think that would be enough to pay your 53 players, but I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how, because on typically 8, 9, 10 players will gobble up 70% of that cap number. So it really is a money game in terms of how you're doling out this money. And you can see by those numbers that when you've got your quarterback, particularly if he's a good one, and he's playing on his rookie numbers, he's not one of that 8, 9, 10 guys that are taking up 70% of the cap. It's a real asset because now you have those other monies to go give to other athletes.
Well, speaking of college athletes, let's talk about something that has just reverberated through the entire collegiate world of sports, and that's NIL, which we all know stands for Needs Infinite Loot. And I'm just amazed.
That's right.
It has changed everything. In fact, it's supposed to be a factor why Nick Saban decided, no, I'm not going to come back as Alabama coach. That's the story. Your thoughts about NIL?
The NIL combined with the portal is a travesty right now. It's a cesspool. And I appreciate the Nick Sabans and the Mike Krzyzewskis of the world, when they retired, said, guys, we got to get this under control because right now this is not good. It's not good for college football. It's really not good for the athletes because at the end of the day, this NIL money that's going to get so focused on the front end, it's going to cost lesser programs to fold up on the back end. And that's not good. They've got to get it under control. The portal compounds it. It's got to get some kind of structure to it. They want to be like the NFL model, then be like the NFL model. You got to put a cap on it. You got to put a specific time on the portal. Right now, it's the wild, wild west. I don't know who's in charge of it, but it's embarrassing, and it's a cesspool for college football.
Coach Billick, when you won your first championship in Baltimore back, I believe, in 2000 over the New York Giants, you were known as an offensive mastermind, yet we all know it was that defense. I mean, wow. I mean, Ray Lewis and the whole smash. But you had 6 coaches on your staff that went to coach other teams. And, I just want to go back to that concept of the quarterback and shooting for the moon, taking these rookies. Hopefully it's the next CJ Stroud. Or having a real coaching staff in place to develop the quarterback over a period of time, to give them a year. I mean, are we beyond that now? I mean, is that even, when you hire a coaching staff, your quarterback's coach, your offense, I mean, does that even matter in today's day and age where it's win now, show me now? I mean, do we even have time with these contracts and the way the NFL is set up to coach up these young quarterbacks and make them starters in the NFL?
It's tougher and tougher, but certainly that element. I wrote a book called The Q Factor, which looked at the 2018 draft, where we had 5 quarterbacks, and typical to chalk, 2 of the 5 turned out to be okay. That was the year that we had Sam Darnold and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, Josh Rosen, and again, same thing. It's a 50-50 crapshoot. When we looked at that draft and the subsequent drafts, the biggest challenge in taking a quarterback, one is, okay, does the ability translate from college to the NFL? That's always the toughest question. But also where one of the misses happened is where you misalign with the style of play, or maybe you get on a cycle where you go through a number of different coaches. That's going to be a factor as well. So if you can get stability at the coaching position, stability in the system, and now have a very clear vision of what you want at the core, at the core abilities of quarterback. Baker Mayfield was one that was escaping my mind, who was the number 1 pick overall in 2018. And you have, I don't want to say he's a bust, but obviously did not perform at the number 1 overall pick level. But he's been through like 6 and 7 different coordinators. That is a strong factor in terms of developing this talent in the NFL.
Sit tight. We've got more with former NFL head coach Brian Billick on the way next.
Both the NFC and the AFC, I think it's going to be wide open going into next year. We're so deep in good quarterback play, probably is as good that we've ever been in the NFL. You follow that trail, I think we've had more teams that are legitimately in the Super Bowl mix than we've had at any given time, and that's exciting.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, but we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with Damian Sassower. Scarlet will be back on later. We're talking with NFL analyst and former NFL head coach Brian Billick. Let's dive back into that conversation.
Coach Billick, I have to ask you this. We've moved through free agency. There's some guys left out there, but for the most part, we're through with that. We've now just completed the draft. I'm looking. I know Michael Barr is looking at his FanDuel account. He's trying to figure out who's going to win the Super Bowl next year. I'm looking at the odds out there. The Niners, the Chiefs, the Ravens are all up there. The Lions too, Michael Barr, the Lions too. But talk to us a little bit, Coach Bill. Which teams have improved their status the most this offseason? Who are you looking for here in 2024?
Well, right now, they're all excited. They're all good. Everybody gets an A, and everybody's going to the Super Bowl right now. That's the exciting thing for the fans and the teams. And certainly the ones, Buffalo, obviously right there on the cusp of it. I think Dallas is flirting with it. Are they going to make the next move? A team like Green Bay is interesting to me to see Jordan Love. Can he indeed? He showed that he could take that next step. Can he go even further in that standpoint? I think Cincinnati, with a healthy Joe Burrow, can get back into the mix. So, yeah, I think that's the exciting thing. I think we're as deep in good quarterback play. And then let me back up too. CJ Stroud in Houston Texans. That is the real deal, and they showed that they can be competitive. So, yeah, on both the NFC and the AFC, I think it's going to be wide open going into next year. We're so deep in good quarterback play, probably is as good that we've ever been in the NFL. You follow that trail, I think we've had more teams that are legitimately in the Super Bowl mix than we've had at any given time, and that's exciting.
I mean, we're talking about the quarterbacks a lot here, but there are some other positions. The running back position, for example, I don't think any running backs were taken in the first round this year. Others that kind of stand out, safety, linebacker. I mean, a lot of these positions, which, you see a few of them now come into the first round. It's just been it's really been light. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of some of those positions, specifically the running back position.
Well, that's always been one that I don't want to say was devalued. Jonathan Brooks was the first running back taken from Texas with the 46th pick. That's the second round. But what we've seen over the last few years is that the second and third round seems to be a fertile ground to get good, solid running backs. And you tend to have a running game by committee. And so there's good value in taking them. People are hesitant to expend a first round pick on the running back position when you can get good value further down. That's not to say that they're not worthy of that. You got the Derrick Henrys in the world that obviously are spectacular, and taking a guy on the first round is not bad, but the position has kind of been devalued per se. And the fact that we had one guy taken in the second round, and then we had three guys taken in the third round. So that seems to be the mode going forward in terms of what people are looking at, simply because you can get value at other positions in the first round, and the running back position. The other one, interesting to me, is the tight end position, because that's one that, as we see, really good tight ends in the league, obviously like a Travis Kelce, like a Mark Andrews in Baltimore. There's a couple really good tight ends around the league. You saw Las Vegas Raiders had a Brock Bowers fall to them at number 13. That's a spectacular pick for them. There wasn't another tight end taken until the second and then the third round. So even though they're coveted, you can usually get some good value. The Commanders took in the second round the kid out of Kent State, Sinnott, I think, and then Ryman from Illinois to Arizona. So you can get, like the running back, it's a high priority. You really want to have one, but you seem to get good value in the second and third round.
One day, and I see it coming, because we're playing more games, NFL games, overseas in London, Germany, Mexico City, in Brazil is coming there. And when will it happen? When the league expands to more teams, and this time maybe a team out in London?
Yeah, that one's above my pay grade, because obviously they are nurturing interest internationally, and they're highly successful games. I do a radio show in London, and those are excited, knowledgeable fans when I get on the radio with the folks in London. And I can't wrap my head around how that's going to work. If you have a franchise in one of these international cities, then how they're going to be competitive in terms of playing in the States, and then teams going obviously over there to play, or whether you can develop a branch of the NFL in the international loop. I don't know. I'm sure they've got some plan for it. It may be that they're just going to continue the sprinkling of games and expand on that. And now it's not onerous when a team only has to play one international game a year, but it complete maybe an entire schedule overseas, but with different teams. I don't know. Mine's above mine, and figuring that out. But clearly the money is there and the international interest is there.
I'm just wondering if you're going to have something like, okay, we're going to play 3 games in London, and then we're going to be on the road for like a month. Then we're going to come back and play 3 more games. And I wonder if some structure like that's going to be set up.
That could be, and certainly that would make sense, that if an international team is going to come to the States, that they have a 2-3 game stretch at the minimum to minimize the travel back and forth. But even with that, the pressure, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. Being on the road for 3 straight weeks and orchestrating that and where you're going, that's a tough circumstance for a team to compete and be competitive with if that's their routine.
Well, Coach Billick, also, let's go back. You coached for San Diego State University, the Aztecs. Go Aztecs. My cousin Larry Sassower, shout out. I have to ask you, some of these universities that have filtered so many players into the NFL, you mentioned Brock Bowers, I'm thinking Georgia, obviously Alabama. Talk to me about the Michigan Wolverines. 13 players in this year's draft selected from this year's team. which, if you're a student, a scholar athlete, and you're looking at, those, institutions that you want to play your college ball for, what's out there? What's the available pool today, given NIL, given the transfer portal? Are we really limited to just a handful of universities now if you really have the talent and what it takes to make it in the NFL?
Yeah, and the money, whether it be a Georgia, we'll see. It will sort itself out in terms of what teams are actually going to get into this Super League they're talking about. Should be 35, 40, 45 teams modeled on the NFL. Certainly Michigan, and that's why they're national champions. What they were able to do with the group started with J.J. McCarthy and then all the way down. Through the seventh round, the number of players. And across the board, defensive line, linebacker, wide receivers, offensive line, some good football players. So with the current state of the portal and the NIL, that's what you're going to see. They're going to see teams that or players that get signed someplace and get developed like a San Diego State, then expand their opportunities and go to a place like Michigan or Georgia or USC, where they're going to pay anybody the amount of money that they pay to try to buy a national championship. And that just is going to kind of be the way of the college football going forward until they get it under control.
Special thanks to NFL Network analyst and former NFL head coach Brian Billick for joining us today.
By the way, on the business side of things, Brian is involved with a few companies, including a recent partnership with Signal Relief. He's also the author of several books, including More Than a Game, The Glorious Present and the Uncertain Future of the NFL. And now, look who's here. Scarlet Fu is back.
I was tied up with the NHL playoffs, but the Rangers swept, so I'm in good shape now.
Sure. We're all okay.
From the gridiron to the tennis courts, the latest edition of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly features the tennis superstar, the GOAT herself, Serena Williams.
Let's take a little listen to a little bit of that conversation.
When I started tennis, first of all, I'm from Compton, California, and I remember playing on these courts and, my life was great. I never felt like I needed anything, and so for me, money was never a motivation. I remember when I first started back in the day, they used to write out checks after you won your tournament, and I would always forget to get the checks. And so at the end of the year, they would always have to say, Serena, we have all these checks for you. And I'm like, oh my God. So it was never.
You would literally forget to pick up the check?
Literally. And at the time I had an accountant who would be like, Serena, they've sent me all these checks that you would forget to get from the tournaments. And so with that being said, that was never my motivation, to be honest. For my motivation, and looking at the success that I had financially was never my starting point. My starting point was always I just want to win championships and I want to have fun and I want to be a great tennis player. And quite frankly, I just wanted to win a Grand Slam. And I honestly, for me, everything else was a bonus. And obviously it's great. I really, everything that I have, believe me, I worked really hard for. Nothing really came for free and nothing came easy. I think everything was super hard working for me. But it is cool to look back and see the success that I've had financially, but also multiplying that now and trying to expand that. And then again, just considering what does that mean for me going forward?
So Serena, when we were thinking about this show, I started thinking about people that I like, respect, admire in the world of sports, in the world of business. And we had a business call recently and I said, would you come on our show?
Yeah.
But I'm interested to know what motivates you today.
When you're used to being a champion, you're used to winning. And so that's something that I'm always motivated by is success. And what is success? I think success is different for a lot of people. And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of people get wrong. For me, success right now is having great investments. I think a lot of people's success is being a mom, which is super successful for me because that's something that I've always wanted to do in my life. Or maybe it's getting an A on your grades or whatever that is. So I think for me, the motivation is definitely success.
Both of us played for a couple decades, right? Very public. Me more domestically, you more around the world. But what's interesting is, Jason, you mentioned $500 million. For me, it was about the same thing, but 90% of my money came from playing baseball on the field. With you, is exact opposite. With yours is marketing.
Yeah.
How do you think about the impact that you've made, not only to all your partners, but how the ripple effect around the world of the business of Serena?
Yeah, it's so different, right? I think it's really interesting how I learned early on that your paycheck from tennis, maybe that's why I forgot him, should be your smallest earning. Oh, that's my dad always told me growing up. And so I always thought, okay, well, partnering with the right people and also deciding who do you really want to partner with, because for me it's also about being very authentic with those partnerships, not necessarily partnering with a company that either doesn't believe in what you're doing or you don't really use and utilize. So I think throughout my whole career, I wanted to make sure that those partnerships are very authentic and they spoke to me, and they also gave back in some sort of way, shape, or form.
That's from the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly this week, featuring Serena Williams.
Up next on the show, we dive behind the scenes of that episode with the co-host, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent, Jason Kelly.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Scarlet Fu, along with Damian Sassower. Michael Barr had to step out. He'll be back next week. The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly is one of the latest series from Bloomberg Originals, covering some of the biggest names where sports, business, and culture collide.
The latest episode features tennis superstar Serena Williams, and joining us to talk a little bit about the new episode is co-host and Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent, Jason Kelly.
I mean, man, when we set out to do this show, I said to Alex, there's a Mount Rushmore of guests, and one of the people on it is Serena Williams. And I got to tell you, she just 100% delivered, as I knew she would. But like, what an amazing story. Again, not just on the tennis court, but off the court. Just incredible.
Especially since when you consider what she's been doing since, right?
Yes.
I mean, she's so active, not just in building her brand, but in building an empire.
Totally building an empire. And, she has identified a place where she can really make a difference. And that is in investing, and specifically investing in highly, highly underrepresented communities via founders who are women or people of color. And as you guys, all the statistics because they are horrifying. About 2% of venture capital money goes to female founders, and about 1%, probably a little less, goes to black founders. And so 68% of Serena Ventures' portfolio is actually diverse. And so, as she did on the tennis court, she is, quite literally breaking down barriers. She's a force. And I think anybody who's spent any time with her knows that she's been super engaged from the beginning on everything that she's involved in. One of the most interesting things is this idea of her relationship with her father, and sort of going the other way on the King Richard himself. And one of the most interesting things that he did, obviously, we've seen the movie, we've followed her career and her sister Venus. He obviously gave them tremendous opportunities to play tennis. And at the same time, what he did to them, and Serena talks about this in the episode, she had a conversation with him where he essentially said, you're in charge of your own money. Figure it out. So he was not prescriptive in that regard. The one thing that he did that really set her up was on her very first deal, the Puma deal, he insisted that she be physically at the table, to the point where she actually fell asleep in the middle of the night. They were negotiating.
Oh my God.
But he said, don't go into another room. You need to be at the table.
Right.
And I have to say, she's never left. And so she is in such firm control of her own direction, strategically, tactically. She has a great team around her. But I can tell you from talking to her, she is intensely involved in like every detail.
I love that anecdote because it really tells you about how she doesn't let people speak on her behalf. She makes sure that she is the principal and that she is representing herself. You talk about her team. A member of her team, in a way, is her spouse, Alexis Ohanian, right?
Yeah.
And of course, an accomplished startup founder himself and an investor. And did you talk a little bit at all about how their worlds kind of intersect?
Yeah, it's a great question. We did talk about that a little bit, because if you think about her life and her business and her tennis, she's had this great series of partners, right? Mm-hmm. First her dad, her sister, obviously, they're incredibly close. They live very close to each other still in Florida. Alexis Ohanian, as you mentioned, co-founder of Reddit. an incredible investor in his own right. She talked about how they've managed to create this kind of like church and state where they each have their own things. Clearly, they are influential to each other. One of the most notable examples was, Alexis led the funding of Angel City Football Club.
You're right.
In the NWSL. And that came, and Serena talks about this a little bit, that came because their daughter Olympia was playing soccer, and Alexa said, I would love to get involved in women's sports because Olympia's into it. And Serena, and this is like classic Serena, said, okay, but you need to ensure that if she's going to be a professional athlete, she gets paid. And so it's like, so that has always been so intentional on her behalf. And so that's, I think, a huge influence that she has had on him. And he is obviously, I just saw him a couple weeks ago here in New York. He's a huge proponent of investing in women's sports. He's got this new track and field thing that he's investing in, and obviously Angel City as well. So clearly very influential there.
Jason, I wonder if you got into the state of tennis. What her belief about what the state of tennis is today, the future stars?
She did talk about the state of tennis insofar as, there were a lot of questions when she left of, can the sport be what it was or what it was without her? She was a huge draw, the ratings, the attendance, everything went up when she was playing. What she has said and others have noted is, tennis does seem to be on good footing. You do have a crop of stars. Obviously, Coco Gauff here in the United States is a massive influence on the popularity. I think her win at the U.S. Open, really sealed that next generation. So I think Serena feels pretty good about where the game is and feels good about, redirecting her efforts into the broader business world.
All right, Jason Kelly, fantastic stuff. Jason Kelly is co-host of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez, and of course, their guest of the week, none other than the GOAT, Serena Williams.
Thanks, guys.
Don't miss the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly this week featuring Serena Williams.
Catch it Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Television or stream it on Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals and find it anywhere you get your podcasts.
Now, let's turn to a subject we've been covering a lot lately. Yet another team wants a new stadium.
Oh, really?
Can you think of a couple of teams here?
I can think of a few of one, but Chicago. Let's talk Chicago.
Let's talk Chicago, and we're talking about the Chicago Bears here. So we need to bring in Shruti Singh, who covers Chicago for us in our Chicago Bureau, all things Chicago, including municipal issues. Shruti, talk to us a little bit here about what the Chicago Bears are aiming to do. Soldier Field is old, and some would say even decrepit, and they're looking to upgrade and build a new stadium.
Yeah, so the Chicago Bears unveiled a $4.7 billion stadium plan that would replace the current Soldier Field, which is about 100 years old. It's one of the smaller stadiums in the country, and it doesn't have a dome. So there's lots of things that the team is looking to change about where it plays, and this particular $4.7 billion stadium complex would include a $3.2 billion stadium itself, but then the rest of the money would be for the complex around the stadium, which could include lots of park space and infrastructure improvements and things like that. And some of it would be financed by the team, and some of it they're looking for help from municipal financing, which is what I cover.
Well, Shruti, I'm sure our audience would love nothing more than to talk about Caleb Williams and Rene Odunze and how the Bears crushed the NFL draft. But, tell us about what has changed, not only in the state of Illinois, but the city of Chicago. How can they even think about taking on a project like this?
So basically, the issue is that, and this has actually come up a lot in conversations, and you'd be surprised that even folks who are talking about the stadium and their love for the Bears, when you listen to the conversations that are going on around Chicago, people are still bringing up the finances, like how is this going to be paid for? And so, as I mentioned, part of the Bears' proposal is for about $900 million in debt financing from the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, which was basically set up in the 80s to help finance pro-sport stadiums. So this organization, this agency, basically helps with selling debt for pro stadiums around the state. Now, one of the things is that these are bonds that are paid for through state and local taxes. Illinois is currently the lowest rated state in terms of its credit rating. It has certainly climbed up the ratings over the last couple of years. It's had a string of upgrades by just improving the way it handles its finances, including passing budgets on time, paying down its debt liability and its pension liability, things like that. But it still has marginally the lowest credit rating among its peers. Chicago also has some of its own financial issues. The two states and local governments share one thing in common, which is that they both have a very large unfunded pension liability. So that is the longest sort of financial burden that both state and local governments have. And it takes up, for each government, it takes about a fifth of their regular budget.
Yeah, it's pretty massive. So you mentioned that this Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, this government agency, was set up in the 80s to build and renovate stadiums for pro teams. Clearly, the environment has changed a lot from the 80s to now, and taxpayers are not so enamored of the idea of having to shoulder the burden of funding in some way or another new facilities for teams owned by billionaires. They would rather the teams shell it out themselves. Can you talk a little bit about the environment?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of questions posed by the elected officials here in Illinois. The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, is saying that, more needs to be known about this proposal, and he has been reluctant to provide any sort of inkling or, support of this initial proposal. He's not ruling it out, but he said, he's skeptical and he's been reluctant. In terms of other leadership here in the state, Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch has said right now in this environment, if this was put for a vote, it would fail. So that's kind of where things stand in terms of what the leadership in Illinois is talking about. But at the same time, Chicago Mayor Johnson was at the press conference last Wednesday and is supportive of this, but this needs approval from the state legislature and the governor.
Shruti, to that exact point, I mean, we just saw in Kansas City that, they put this whole thing to a vote. There was, marketing going on into the vote by Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. I mean, people knew about it. They were made aware of all the details of how much it would cost, et cetera, and they were given an opportunity to vote. In this case, if I'm reading this correctly, they're trying to push this through in 5 weeks. So talk to us a little bit about the process here. And is there anything we can read into from that sort of accelerated timeline?
So right now, the Illinois General Assembly is going through its budgeting process, and they have about 5 weeks left. Actually, a little bit under 5 weeks, just about a month left in their current spring session. Now, the Bears indicated last Wednesday that they would actually like to seek and get approval for this project, which, as I mentioned, would require funding partially through this sports facility that's run by the state. And they're eager to get this rolling in this spring session, which ends at the end of this month. The Illinois General Assembly has lots of other things going on that they're trying to do, including balancing a budget that includes a lot of competing needs right now in the state of Illinois.
Our thanks to Shruti Singh for joining us from our Chicago bureau. And that does it for this week's edition of the Bloomberg Business of Sports. If you missed any of it, check it out now on the Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports. We're here each and every week at the same time. For Michael Barr and Damian Sassower, I'm Scarlet Fu. Tune in next week for the latest on the stories moving big money in the world of sports. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.